Is it time to sell Bitcoin, crypto, stocks? Is the cycle ending early? Are there reasons to be selling Bitcoin and cryptos and potentially stocks as well? At this stage in the cycle, that's on the agenda for today's video, as Bitcoin hangs on precariously to the support level here, roughly around $60,000. Plenty coming up on BTC. I've also got the altcoin market to get through with you guys. Some major declines here for the stock markets, which has prompted these questions here around the cycle and potential reasons to sell early. Now, if you have followed me on Twitter, which I suggest you do, or X down below, I've covered a lot about the Wall of Warrior, which I'll get into in today's video, but that's basically like a back catalog of what's happened over the last 2 years. Ton of history there. So without further ado, let's dive in, guys. You guys have been amazing, smashing the like button to help us beat the YouTube algorithm. I'm testing out not putting in ridiculous headlines and stupid faces, so I need your help to guess further that journey. Let's go. 3,500 likes in today's video. We can try and beat the YouTube algorithm. Alright, so first up, going through just some of the news headlines very briefly. Stock market news. We've seen the stock markets fall a little further. Not much else has happened here after the big news of the weekend, with the war breaking out in the Middle East, or attempting to break out. At least that's what the news is telling us, and you might have recalled from a couple of days ago. I suggested that low bar, which was on Saturday, when we first saw a lot of that news coming through from Iran, trying to send a lot of missiles over to Israel. Sometimes these type of events mark significant lows, or they can mark intermediate lows, and so far that's precisely what has happened. So we've seen that low, the market rallied from there. In this case, Bitcoin has rallied from that point, and it got to our potential resistance level, as we pointed out in yesterday's video, looking at $667,000. So it fell $71 short of hitting that exact price, which is a barely fraction of a percent there. So now it's reversed significantly, down 3.5% on the day, coming back towards 63,000. I'm going to cover this just a little later on in the video. Should we see a 60K break, and what we could expect to the downside in terms of price levels there, I've got a little bit more to get through on this particular chart, looking at very key price levels based on the chart here, with significant swings, of course, but I just want to cover off where we sit with this war news here, which seems to have lost a little bit of energy over the last 24 hours when it comes to the market sentiment itself and the price, at least for BTC. The technical term for this is the wall of worry. Essentially, it's financial markets trending up over time, but showing signs of dips when there is some extreme bad news. So this extremely bad news typically, as I said, puts in lows or significant lows. Or sort of local lows in the market, and then we start to build from that point again. Meanwhile, the masses are sort of sitting in fear, or extreme fear, and opportunities. So I want to have a look at how we can identify these areas around these points. We're not trying to pick the exact low, we're not going to buy the exact low point, but around those prices, as we have done here on the channel in 2022 and 2023, and I'll show you specifically on the charts, and you've got all the receipts there on X, as well as I went through with those particular posts. But if you're unfamiliar with this, familiarize yourself with it, because this has been going on for decades upon decades. It's the same sort of thing. Wall of worry is a financial markets periodic tendency to surmount a host of negative factors and keep ascending. That's what you would see in YouTube and X all the time, just tons and tons of bad news headlines around why real estate should be crashing or stock market should be crashing or any number of reasons why anything should be crashing, yet over time you always see the markets go up. That's essentially what the wall of worry is, and essentially you can find a lot of these charts here that will point out every single bad news event that's happened along the way. Sometimes it's around local top, sometimes it's around local bottoms, but essentially over that course of time the markets trend up.
And typically in a major bull market we don't necessarily see very significant corrections, as I'll show you in just a moment as well. Now if you do want to follow here on X, this is the post here that I started back in May and then listed out a lot of events from 2022 as well and showed the timing of those for that wall of war. So it's essentially like I don't know, like a textbook or a back catalog or something like that, where you can see these events playing out and then you can pinpoint them onto the chart themselves. So that's how I like to use this here. And is the cycle ending early or normal SP 500 seasonality? Added the interest rates to it recently. Speaking of interest rates, this is fresh now, one interest rate cut for 2024. Now of course this can change tomorrow and we go back to 2 interest rate cuts. Whatever it is, the main point that I make here with interest rates and how the masses always get it wrong, or almost always get it wrong, is that majority we're expecting interest rate cuts at every single meeting throughout 2024. You've heard me say that before, and now we're down to one. Yesterday there was a brief moment where we even saw an interest rate increase for September. That has obviously come back down here, and that this one here in December jumped up. So if you're unsure how to read this, I saw a couple of comments about that through here. You're just looking at the blue and then looking at
the column that's the interest rate, and this is the probability of a pause, which is the current interest rate here, an increase which would be right, or a decrease which would be left. And so far what today were basically 3 pauses, 1 cut into September and then pauses again, and then I suggest it's probably going to go up this way, and then probably another cut in January of 2025, and then it would just stay around that for the next 3 meetings. So this has really squeezed to the right, meaning less cuts, maybe even just pauses for a little while, maybe even going into the increases soon. But the main thing that the market has to do now is digest this move, which of course is causing some fear out there in the markets, along with the war over the weekend. So essentially just want to understand how we can read this. I'm showing again because I think it's really prudent to keep track of some of the seasonality. Markets, essentially this is kind of what happens in these years, election years. That is, we have an election coming up at the end of the year, or us election coming up, and you typically see a grind sideways. You'll see some corrections just depending on how hard the market has run. You can see the blue line sitting president running in the election year excluding 2020 behind my. That's what it says there. That's because we had the crash there. So looking at the blue line here, it only went up about 4% into the peak there of March, and you can see it hit March again and then had a slightly higher peak here in early April, and then basically didn't do anything. It went sideways and down into June before it started to climb again.